ordinary Guyanese man and woman. Mr. Speaker, we want to say, and we've been very clear, and we speak to every Guyanese that we would meet, that we understand your anxiety, but notwithstanding your anxiety, we as Guyanese, Guyana as a sovereign state has certain international obligations, and we are required by those treaties to which we subscribe to treat those who are in our midst with the utmost level of dignity and regard for human rights. But it would be irresponsible of us not to acknowledge that the concern exists. We would be shirking our duties as members of this National Assembly not to represent the interests of the people who elected us to be here. Mr. Speaker, we want to make it clear that we must treat, as I said, migrants with the dignity and respect that one human being deserves from another. We must treat them as guests, not as threats. Mr. Speaker, but I want to be very clear about something, that even guests are expected to obey the rules of the House. Mr. Speaker, we want to be clear on this side of the House that peaceful, law-abiding migrants will be accorded the Guyanese hospitality and the full protection of our laws, as we are required to do. We want to make that very clear. We are here, Mr. Speaker, and we have been reminding Guyanese, because we will not operate as if we are ostriches with our proverbial heads in the sand. We see the anxiety of the Guyanese people. We see the videos on social media that is giving rise to more anxiety. But we want to say, and we are at pains to remind Guyanese, that even if they are provoked, they are not to take the law into their own hands. They must turn offenders over to the authorities immediately. Mr. Speaker, in the existing circumstances, we want to be clear that Venezuelan migrants, bar those, of course, who are entitled to citizenship by virtue and hospitality is just that, accommodation and hospitality, and it must not be regarded as a path to citizenship unless you are entitled to it, or as permanent residency, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I am speaking about here is embodied in the laws of so many countries, Mr. Speaker. And if we research, we will see that this is nothing new and novel. But this is what a nation does to protect its people, Mr. Speaker. Our first duty is to the people of Guyana, it's to Guyanese, and we will not shirk in our duty. Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear, because again, we as representatives of the people, we do not sit in this National Assembly of our own free will and volition. We were elected to represent the interests of Guyanese people. And that is what I stand here today intent on doing. And so I hope, Mr. Speaker, that we've been very clear that we will not encourage the mistreatment of any migrant. We will not encourage Guyanese taking the law into their own hands. And I repeat that for emphasis, because I know that there are those who are interested in propaganda and in cheap political points. We are not here for that today. We are here to represent the interests of the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that it is important that we understand, as we have been calling on this side of the House, that the time is now for a national conversation on migration. We called for it 2 years ago. We warned about these numbers 2 years ago. I stood right in this spot in the National Assembly 2 years ago, and we said that unless we have serious conversations and unless we took serious action, we would find ourselves in the position that we find ourselves in today. And we are living to see that exactly what we warned about has come to pass, much to the detriment and anxiety of Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, it is all around. It is all around us. When you look at the legal frameworks that exist to protect Guyanese, to protect the citizens of a sovereign state, and to make sure that the path for citizenship is crystal clear, that the path for residency is crystal clear. Mr. Speaker, now is the time for us to have those conversations. We are a small nation of 800,000 thereabouts, if we are to believe the last set of statistics. And Mr. Speaker, we owe it to our people. We owe it to our people to have a very clear legal framework. A framework that does not extend to fiat or rule by fiat, but that is clearly deliberated in this House so that people who come to our nation will know exactly where they stand and how they stand and what is their path to citizenship, if any, Mr. Speaker. I repeat, our first duty is to the people of Guyana, and we must be unapologetic in the prosecution of that duty, Mr. Speaker. We are unapologetic about putting Guyana first. And so, like I said, Mr. Speaker, we have a migration situation. We have a situation of thousands of persons pouring over our border. We have a situation where there are persons who are entitled by virtue of their parentage to be given Guyanese citizenship. And we want to make it clear that we on this side of the House understand that. Mr. Speaker, like I said, a perusal of citizenship laws around the world sets out a very clear path. And so I am wondering whether it is time that we propose legislative measures to make it clear, and particularly in the context of a nation of 28 million people, where the youngest child is taught from the time that he or she could read that Essequibo somehow belongs to them. Mr. Speaker, these are extraordinary times, and we cannot behave as if it is business as usual, because it is not business as usual, Mr. Speaker. And so for us to consider whether, Mr. Speaker, that we should have specific laws to deal with this issue. We must consider whether, given the fact of this territorial claim, given the fact of this belief that Essequibo belongs to them, whether we must not enshrine in our laws provisions that speak to persons being, and particularly migrants, and particularly people who are coming in from the neighboring western neighbor, that we would say whether there is merit in considering laws that make it clear that participation in inappropriate political activities that amount to insurrection, treason, or promoting secession or annexation will be met firmly by prosecution, deportation, and possibly a ban on residencies. Mr. Speaker, let us not forget, we had a Rupununi uprising, and we must, unless we fail to learn from our history, be doomed to repeat those mistakes. There is too much at stake now, Mr. Speaker, for us not to learn from our history and to proceed blindly along. Mr. Speaker, there will be dual citizens, and dual citizens must choose their loyalty. And they have a right to choose whichever loyalty they will exercise. If they choose to be Venezuelans, as they have a right to so do, then we must consider whether it will be important to proscribe their ability to act and participate in Guyanese civic and political activities. And Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear about this. This might not have been critical had we not been dealing with people who genuinely believe, because we interact with people. We interact with people in our community and we get feedback, and there is a genuine belief, as represented the other day by the map of Venezuela on that food cart that included the Essequibo in central Georgetown, that we had to send the police to make sure that that was done away with. That is the gravity of what we are dealing with. So forgive me if I'm not prepared to engage in too many pleasantries about this. We have to be serious. There is a Goliath at the gate, and we have to, like David, gather our stones. Mr. Speaker, we must immediately enhance screening procedures at our borders. We must set about to verify and record in a transparent and credible manner those Venezuelan nationals, like I said, who are legitimately entitled to citizenship by virtue of their parentage, those who are eligible as economic migrants, and those who may, given the international legal framework, be eligible for refugee status, and even those who will be deported back to Venezuela because they pose a security threat. This is what the screening process at our borders should be doing. Mr. Speaker, we must establish a robust, continuous education program, one which matches the fervor and intensity that we see next door. As I speak, there are jingles out on social media, whole national songs from Venezuela claiming that Essequibo is theirs, as we sit in this house and as we debate this motion. And so, Mr. Speaker, we must establish a robust, continuous education program which will engender patriotism and respect for our collective heritage. We must have a program, Mr. Speaker, which will inform the youngest to the oldest about the seriousness of the territorial issue. They must know about Venezuela's scandalous and illegitimate claim to our Essequibo. The program, Mr. Speaker, must be tailored to specific audiences, and it must include our 9 indigenous nations in their language. The urgency of the situation demands that no effort be spared to light the fire of patriotism in the belly of every Guyanese man, woman, and child, Mr. Speaker. The urgency is that great, Mr. Speaker. We must have a program that embodies the fundamental and inherent truth that we will repeatedly teach our children and our new adult citizens, that Essequibo, as one of the 3 counties of Guyana, is, was, and always will be 100% Guyanese. From Pacaraima, Mr. Speaker, to Parica, from the sprawling savannah, sir, to the rapids at Rockstone, Essequibo belongs to Guyana. Mr. Speaker, now more than ever, we must be committed to full collaboration between the government and all national stakeholders. I want to be clear, the time for petty partisan politics is over. The time for subordinating the national interest below the interests of party and political expediency is over. This moment demands that we, Mr. Speaker, it demands that we rise above this. You know, Mr. Speaker, there are defining moments in a nation's history. These are moments, sir, that shape the course of our collective destiny. The pivotal junctures that we meet, particularly these pivotal junctures, are very often the crucibles in which the character and resilience of a nation are tested. These defining moments, however, are not solely challenges, Mr. Speaker. They are opportunities. They are opportunities for us to learn, to grow, to redefine ourselves. They are opportunities to make positive changes and progress as a nation. It is during these moments, Mr. Speaker, that we have a choice. That we could either set a new course, one that aligns with our values and our aspirations, or we could go down the same road that we have been going down. Mr. Speaker, I'm reminded of the words of J.W. Chinnapen as was set to song by the late Valerie Rodway, which we now know as the national song, Arise Guyana. And it reminds us that when freedom waved her banner bright, on Iron Ghana's verdant height, a nation's glad triumphant song, reverberant rose full, loud and long. Guyana, fair Guyana, be true to your higher destiny. Mr. Speaker, inherent in that is an admonition that there is a lower destiny that we must avoid, a lower destiny that we must shun. Mr. Speaker, we are true to a lower destiny when we settle for less, when we use the path of least resistance, when we decide that we are entitled to far less than we are as a nation. Mr. Speaker, a nation embracing its lower destiny manifests itself in a myriad of ways, from failing to take care of the poor and needy, to tolerating injustice and inequity, to fomenting hate and strife for political gain, to failing to invest in our human capital. As Guyanese, Mr. Speaker, we must now more than ever forcefully reject any attempt to be led down such a path. And we must commit ourselves to strive for excellence, embrace our potential, and collectively work towards a higher destiny for ourselves, for our community, and for our nation. And you may ask, Mr. Speaker, why is this important? It is important, sir, because it is only as a united Guyana that we will stand a chance of defeating this Goliath. Mr. Speaker, that is why we on this side of the House have been clear that there will be no daylight between us and the government as it comes and as it relates to the independence of Guyana, to our territorial integrity, and to our sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, we want to be pellucid, and we'll continue to be pellucid. Mr. Speaker, the only way that we will be able to overcome this is to unite. And Mr. Speaker, it must be unity not just in word, but it must be unity in thought. It must be unity in deed. It must be a unity that says, I am my brother's keeper. It must be a unity that says that when one Guyanese suffers, the entire Guyana feels it. It is a unity that will say that we must now put an end to discrimination, to strife, to discord. Because, Mr. Speaker, unity, we speak of it, but we have to walk it out now as a nation. And this is the moment that we have to demonstrate to the world that we are able, we are capable, and we are up to the challenge of uniting for the good of Guyana and for Guyanese. It is true, Mr. Speaker, that how we meet this moment will determine our legacy, and it will determine our place in this world and our place in history. Let us remember in this moment that unity, resilience, adaptability are our greatest assets in confronting the challenges and seizing the opportunities that will come our way. As we face the defining moment of our time, let us be a nation that rises to the occasion. Let us be a nation that demonstrates strength of character and depth of will and depth of unity. Mr. Speaker, we may not have might on our side, but we have right on our side. Mr. Speaker, we have the rule of law on our side. We have the support of the international community on our side. And therefore, the urgency of the moment, sir, demands that we send a clear and ambiguous message that all of Guyana is united in the fundamental premise that the Essequibo, which is the heartland, is 100% Guyanese. It is ours. It is not up for debate. It is not up for debate. It is not up for Barbados-type negotiations. We are confident, sir, in the merits of our case, and we expect to prevail. We reaffirm the full, perfect, and final settlement that was established and embodied in the 1899 award. We reaffirm, Mr. Speaker, the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of this dear land of Guyana, Mr. Speaker. We reaffirm the principles and tenets, sir, which in the interest of time I will not delve into, to support in this motion to support the government and people of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. We stand strong, Mr. Speaker. And I want to end by saying this, sir. We know we will win. We know we will win. Because, as the famous Bob Marley said, we are confident in the victory of good over evil. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, even though we are hemmed in on every side, even though foes may encamp around us, Mr. Speaker, we want to say to the miner at Monkey Mountain who may be worried about his claim, we want to say to that homemaker in Hampton Court that may be worried about the future of her children. We want to say to the farmer at Fairfield that this land has been in his family for generations and he now wonders what is the implication of this for me, and he's anxious. We say, Mr. Speaker, to the children at Chenapau, we say to Guyanese across these 83,000 square miles, do not fear. Do not fear. We are confident in the victory of good over evil and standing together as one people in this one nation with one destiny. We shall prevail. We shall emerge stronger. We shall emerge better. Long live, Mr. Speaker, the people of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Long live, Mr. Speaker, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. And now for the Honorable Minister of Amerindian Affairs, the Honorable Pauline Sukai. We may have to get you to use another mic in the meanwhile. Just give the technician two moments and we will continue.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the motion proposed by my colleague, the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, in reaffirming the arbitral award of 1899, which definitively settled the land boundaries between the then British Guyana and Venezuela, which land boundaries was recognized by Venezuela for some 6 decades until our country began its quest for independence. It was Venezuela's sudden non-recognition of the award which ultimately led to the Geneva Agreement of February the 17th, 1966, by which it was agreed that the resolution of the controversy of Venezuela's contention that the arbitral award was null and void would be pursued through a number of measures. Venezuela has sought to prove its spurious claim, which is trumped up in a vain attempt to rewrite the boundaries of our country. Today, no doubt, we have stood our ground as a nation on the position that all of Guyana belongs to us Guyanese, that the arbitral award between the then colony of British Guyana and the United States of Venezuela in 1899 and the Geneva Agreement of 1966 are 2 established definitive positions agreed by both countries to settle the issue. Venezuela has blatantly demonstrated complete disregard for international law, the principles of which every government and past government of Guyana has had total respect and have upkept. It is no secret that the youngest Guyanese and the oldest Guyanese have always claimed that we will not give up a blade of grass. And so too should be the positions of the representation of the people in this August, or leaders in this August House from all sides. And immediately, I am very pleased and also very proud that our Guyanese leaders have taken a stand, a united stand together on this controversy, and has taken a single position that in defense of our country and our people. Mr. Speaker, past and current generation of our people have had to live with Venezuela's claim hanging over their head to more than 2/3 of our country. And now today, we are confronted with the greatest threat to our territorial integrity. by the most presumptuous act thus far. An act that will seek to give Venezuela, through a referendum, the right to annex Essequibo, which they have coveted and continues to illegally pursue with growing aggression. Mr. Speaker, Venezuela has now gone beyond provocation. On the northwestern area of Guyana, mainly Amerindian resides there, and they are living under intimidation and heightened tension. And they will be impacted the most. In fact, all of Guyana will be impacted. And this will continue if Venezuela is allowed to continue to fuel this controversy. In reality, it's a big concern for peace and stability in the border communities. Further movements of military personnel, and I suspect arsenal by Venezuelan military on the shores of Guyana, represents a confirmation that the government of Venezuela continues to misrepresent the 1966 Geneva Agreement. The same agreement by which the General Secretary of the United Nations exercised his mandate to commit the resolution of the controversy at the International Court of Justice for a final and binding agreement. Guyana has full confidence in the international judicial process and has urged Venezuela to present its arguments appropriately before the International Court of Justice. Guyana further rejects the proposal to return to any form of dialogue with Venezuela on the controversy outside the process which is before the court. Venezuela, on the other hand, continues with brazen rhetoric and defiant posture. And this posture by Venezuela needs to be strongly condemned. Mr. Speaker, Venezuela's most strident statements and the pending referendum on December 3rd of this year reiterates that government disregard for the judicial solution to the controversy. The International Court has twice confirmed that it has jurisdiction to hear the case. Guyana continues to firmly believe that justice will once more prevail and that Guyana will emerge strong for and behalf of all the people. We are now a nation on guard more than ever. The threat that has been unleashed on our population should not be taken lightly. Our communities on the borders have been subjected to increasing intimidation by the evident buildup of Venezuelan personnel, military and other. If there was ever a time for unity in our country, it is now. To face and defend collectively this brazen act to deny us Guyanese of our rights to live within our agreed borders and to develop the resources of our entire territory. Mr. Speaker, by Resolution 3314 of December 14, 1974, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the definition of aggression as being the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of another state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the Charter of the United Nations. In that resolution, Mr. Speaker, the United Nations General Assembly adopted several acts that qualify as an act of aggression. The first being, and Venezuela is guilty, the invasion or attack by the armed forces of a state of the territory of another state, or any military occupation, however temporary, resulting from such invasion or attack, or any annexation by the use of force of the territory of other states or part thereof. Again, I reiterate that Venezuela is a guilty partner. Mr. Speaker, as Venezuela prepares to execute their crusade of greed, the government of that country should be warned that this deliberate intention to annex a portion of Guyana's territory by the use of force will constitute an act of aggression that goes beyond the Charter of the United Nations. The ancestral beginnings of the people of this land demand respect from people who stake their claim on the papacy of centuries later. Amerindian heritage takes priority over any conquistador claims of subsequent years. Amerindian development and right to peace, security, livelihood, and to keep apace with the transition of Guyana into a modern state needs to be respected and secure. The government of Guyana has prioritized Amerindian development, expending technical and financial support to build out our villages and communities. Unlike what obtains internationally in many other parts of the country, many other parts of the world, where their first people are marginalized or their issues and development are still on the back burner. Guyana children, youths, and women in our country continue to urge for an expansion of opportunities, which expectantly will secure a future of economic independence for today and tomorrow. And I can assure you that our government has responded to those urges. And we will have to ensure that the support, the development, the position where our children, our youths, our women, and all of Guyana is now poised, that these must be secured and protected. And we should not, at no time, allow a country to behave in such bullish manner to destroy what we have worked so tirelessly as a nation and endured as a nation to be erased. The December 3rd referendum, as I see it, seeks to legitimize the voices of the Venezuelan people by its government through a vote to annex Essequibo. This defiance, if allowed to happen, will have consequences for all of Guyana and to our total territorial integrity and sovereignty. We therefore call on all peace-loving nations to stand with Guyana in upholding the rule of law, and respect for the principles of international law in condemning Venezuela's intention to violate the territorial integrity of Guyana. I applaud the Guyanese population in country and in the diaspora for embracing the spirit of nationalism. And I also want to say with pride that I embrace the united stand, the National Assembly, in its resolve to preserve and protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of our country. I also want to applaud His Excellency Dr. Irfan Ali to ensuring that he offered the olive branch and was able to have humble yet significant breakthrough with the opposition on this position. And I want to say that this is a position which in many significant instances in our country should be maintained. On this note, Mr. Speaker, I support and endorse the motion of support for the government and the people of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, and reaffirming recognition of the 1899 Arbitral Award and the 1966 Geneva Agreement, and simply put, as all Guyanese knows it, that Essequibo belongs to us. Salute to Guyana.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. And now I call on the Honorable Member, Mr. Vincent Henry, to make his contribution.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Guyana Action Party, a member of the coalition, I stand to make my contribution on the motion of support for the government and people of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and reaffirming recognition of the 1899 Arbitral Award and the 1966 Geneva Agreement. Mr. Speaker, before I delve into this motion, please allow me to express a warm welcome to all our distinguished visitors who are here with us today in Parliament. I encourage you to visit our hinterland and so enjoy our hospitality and the unique experiences we have to offer. I guarantee that should you visit once, you will always want to come back to visit. Mr. Speaker, the subject of our debate today is one that must be appropriately placed as being most important for our future survival as a nation in the short, medium, and long term. Mr. Speaker, Essequibo is our El Dorado. It is our home, and we are proud to live there. Mr. Speaker, please allow me to say that the indigenous peoples of Guyana stand firmly with all Guyanese in saying to the world that Essequibo, our El Dorado county, is ours and will stay ours. Mr. Speaker, the history of what is now known as the North and South America did not begin with the arrival of Christopher Columbus, who got lost on his way to the East Indies. Prior to Columbus, my ancestors as a whole settled and lived without country borders as we know it today. Mr. Speaker, because of the worsening socio-economic situation in Venezuela, we have seen Guyanese who had migrated to Venezuela remigrating to Guyana with their families. We welcome them and wish them all the best. Also, Mr. Speaker, there are migrants from many countries who are in transit to other pastures or have settled here legally. On humanitarian grounds, we welcome them, we welcome you. Mr. Speaker, recently I saw an indigenous Venezuelan Waro child, about 4 years old, sitting on a floor in front of a shop in Latham, begging for a meal. I saw someone purchasing a meal and giving it to the baby. Mr. Speaker, I immediately called the International Organization for Migration's office to report this matter and to seek their assistance. I must say that the team from IOM and other agencies visited a few days later, and support was given to those in need. Mr. Speaker, please allow me to say thanks to the IOM, UNICEF, Food for the Poor, and other local and international organizations for their timely, positive interventions to those in need, be it Venezuelans or whomsoever. Mr. Speaker, this problem or the issue of migrants and refugees entering our country is one we have to face frontally. And we must not, if I should use the Guyanese terminology, dilly-dally on this issue. We therefore request that the government seriously consider to expand an all-inclusive task force with adequate budget to manage the migrants-refugee situation urgently. Mr. Speaker, we note that the government of Venezuela is embarking on a referendum to, among other issues, seek the annexation of Essequibo. We note that this move has no support or legal leverage in international law. Mr. Speaker, to a loaded dice by Venezuela is set for the 3rd of December to up its ante and could lead to Venezuela, against international laws, moving to annex Essequibo. Mr. Speaker, I repeat that we stand with all Guyanese and the government of Guyana against this most serious threat to our sovereignty and territorial integrity. Mr. Speaker, we are cognizant of the fact that Venezuela is heading towards an elections, and we ask that the Essequibo factor be not used by anyone to work in their favor with the disruption of the zone of peace that we all currently enjoy. Mr. Speaker, we in Essequibo and in Guyana note that there has been for some time a massive exodus of Venezuelans to neighboring countries, not only Guyana. This, we understood, is because of the terrible socio-economic conditions that the people of Venezuela are experiencing. We, the inhabitants of Essequibo, the Guyanese Essequibians, given the choice, prefer to speak English and live free of any conquistadores enslaving us. Mr. Speaker, we are not in a perfect country, but it would be most calamitous for us to allow ourselves to descend to a situation in which we can be subjugated or having to migrate to other countries in search for better socio-economic conditions. Having a Venezuelan ID card will not make our lives better. And I leave it at that for now. Mr. Speaker, with the previous statements, one cannot say in all honesty that we are happy with the state of affairs in Guyana. The same way we can shout with one voice to say that we are all in solidarity and we stand and say that Essequibo is ours, which we mean, the same way we must work towards correcting or solving the festering problems that we face in our beloved Guyana. Mr. Speaker, we call for the People's Progressive Party's government, that is currently the government of Guyana, to respect our symbols of nationhood, inclusive of our flag, the golden arrowhead, and our national motto of one people, one nation, one destiny. And I heard the Honorable Hugh Todd did mention it today, and I wanted to go across and shake his hand, but I didn't do it. Next time. The one Guyana slogan that is currently being promoted by the People's Progressive Party using state funds is being seen to be a political slogan that caters for only one section of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, it is said that whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. Only someone in this state would wake up one morning and instruct the police in Guyana to identify their vehicles with the Spanish word policia. What message are you sending to Guyanese in these times, be it actual or subliminal? What message? Mr. Speaker, we saw a Facebook video which was somehow allowed to circulate, in which a senior executive of the government is said to have met in secrecy with Venezuelans, migrants, and sought to wrongfully promote a partnership of national unity, APNU, as practicing xenophobia against the Venezuelan migrants. It seemed that this individual would go to all ends, including putting Guyana in danger to achieve his objective of continuing his de facto presidency for another term. We call on this individual to tell us whether this is true or false. If true, the least we expect as soon as possible is an apology to the people of Guyana, not to us in Parliament, the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, as we sit in the House to give our support to Guyana, our beautiful mother, we have to insist that we are given the reasons to feel that we are fairly included in all spheres of Guyana's life. Mr. Speaker, since the PPP became the government of 2020, we have seen the attempted and actual trampling of the rights of indigenous peoples. One example is a single-window bill that sought to supersede the Amerindian Act and the land rights of the indigenous peoples. Luckily, the coalition managed to get this bill to go to a select committee where satisfactory changes are made thanks to the coalition and the government of Guyana. However, Mr. Speaker, recently a petroleum activities bill was passed in Parliament that gave the Minister of Natural Resources the full authority to control the process and issue oil exploration licenses in any part of Guyana. This is inclusive of indigenous peoples' ancestral lands, whether titled or untitled, and land contiguous to it. Mr. Speaker, we urge that this bill be urgently repealed. Mr. Speaker, this unjust threat by Venezuela must not see us going our separate ways, but on the contrary, allow us to come together as a wholesome nation. As such, things cannot continue as normal. No one will stay proud when hungry and in need. Time to look after the needs of the people. Time for livable incomes for our workers. Time for retooling the Guyana Defense Force. Time for restarting our national service. Time for fair and equitable distribution of our natural patrimony. Mr. Speaker, already we have noted that some are promoting Guyana to be an antagonist in this controversy. This is totally untrue. Please allow me to repeat that Guyana's modus operandi with regards to this issue has always been to follow the course of acceptable international law. Mr. Speaker, please allow me to express many thanks to the countries and international organizations that already express solidarity with our position and have called for both parties to respect the International Court of Justice in the final arbiter. Let me say it again. We are not causing this. We are not the antagonists here. Mr. Speaker, as a proud Guyanese, I join with all patriotic Guyanese, including my colleagues in the Noble House, in saying that we affirm the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the state of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, and that we are in full support for the motion before us in its entirety. Let us remember the famous story of the three-legged store told by a former Vice President, Mr. Sidney Allicock, when he said that there are three legs if there are three legs on a stool, you have to have all three legs. And the three legs in this situation, I would dare say, is the opposition, the government, and the people. All three of us are needed in this struggle that we are facing now. Long live our dear Cooperative Republic of Guyana with its 83,000 square miles. No, nothing less, including our beloved Essequibo, our El Dorado. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. And now for the Honorable Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, the Honorable Member, Ms. Gail Teixeira. Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, our beloved Guyana finds itself facing menacing threats emanating from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Guyana has always aspired to and remains unwaveringly committed to peace and peaceful resolution of disputes, as stated by President Irfan Ali at the UN General Assembly. Today, November 6, 2023, is a historic occasion in the life of this Parliament, the Parliament of Guyana. The motion before us captures the long road we have traversed to defend Guyana's territorial integrity through peaceful means. One that has been repeated time and time again since our independence as a nation to this moment. In fact, when one goes to the parliamentary records, the issue of the British Guyana and Venezuela the debate started in Parliament on the 28th of February 1964, prior to our independence. And then again, just before our independence, the 28th of April 1966. And yet again, on the 17th of July 1968. These are all motions that were brought before the House. The 8th of July 1982, regarding Venezuela's claim to Guyana, and now today. So this Parliament has debated, recognized this issue that is one that impedes our full development and our right to self-determination as a nation. And this is the one issue we can agree on as government and opposition. And regardless of who is in government and who is in opposition, regardless of the sharp differences of our views on many issues, this is the one issue that we have unconditional, unwavering support for the 1899 Arbitral Award and Guyana's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and our commitment to the process at the ICJ, which started in 2018. My dear friends, this is a golden opportunity for our nation to forge national unity. And what are the main issues? We can quibble about many things, we can disagree about many things. But if Guyana doesn't exist, we have no homeland, and we are seeing what is going on in the world by annexations that are taking place in other parts of the world. We do not want this to happen in this part of the world. We do not want to happen to us as Guyanese people, nor to any people who are within our borders. There is no other time other than now for all the parliamentarians and all Guyanese to resolutely support the 1899 Arbitral Award and the process before the International Court of Justice. Speakers before me have spoken about the Arbitral Award of 1899. And as has been stated by other speakers, it was a culmination of arbitral proceedings during which the respective territorial claims of Great Britain and Venezuela were addressed at great length and in great detail by distinguished legal counsel representing the two states, including going through many thousands of pages of written submissions and more than 200 hours of oral hearings before the Arbitral Award. My friend, Minister Todd, pointed out that Venezuela got a huge chunk of land out of that award, and Guyana a lesser amount. And we must remember that arbitral award, we won our borders as final perfect, but at the same time, Venezuela benefited as well, very well. They demanded they had that land at the mouth of the Orinoco, and they got it. So we have to be able to tell our people, someone talked about fear, and people are afraid. But we have to always stand on the ground of righteousness and justice, and that is that. And that is the ground upon which Guyana stands. We stand on the ground of our righteousness and justice, that the proceedings of the tribunal were full, perfect, and final settlement of all matters regarding the territory of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid to not repeat some of the earlier speakers, but we must emphasize a point, and that is that for 6 decades after the 1899 award was delivered, Venezuela treated the award as a final settlement of that matter. For 6 decades, it consistently recognized, affirmed, and relied upon the arbitral award as full, perfect, and final determination of the boundary of British Guyana. Between 1900 and 1905, Venezuela participated freely in a joint demarcation of the boundary, in strict adherence to the letter of the 1899 award, and emphatically refused to countenance even minor technical modifications of the boundary line described in the award. So they're very meticulous in using the maps, and I should pause for a minute to say that in that whole area of the arbitral award, that the 2 countries who were given signed maps that they signed to, that this was the final settlement. There are official maps in the 2 countries and probably abroad that would show that Venezuela signed on to and agreed to the boundaries, which are our land boundaries. We also must remember that our neighbor Brazil also in 1928 had the boundary agreement with Venezuela and Guyana to create the trijunction area, allowing for the 3 countries where they meet. Mr. Speaker, for 60 years, Venezuela gave full effect to the award and the boundaries of Guyana. What happened as we came closer to independence? And of course, people have talked about the Mallet-Prévost letter and all the other things. And this is not the place, maybe, to go into all the political history that was occurring in Venezuela at that time, what were the machinations, and what was the concern of external forces and the powers that be that were concerned about Guyana and Guyana's independence. But as we came closer to independence as a nation, and as I said, after more than half of a century of recognition, affirmation, and reliance on the award, Venezuela sought to repudiate the 1899 award for the first time on the basis that on the basis of that departure from its long-standing recognition, Venezuela began to make far-reaching and aggressive claims that it was entitled to 3/4 of Guyana's sovereign territory. In the decades since independence, Venezuela has continued to advance these claims with increasing menace and in disregard of the impact of the claims on Guyana and the wider region. In recent times, more so than I think ever before, because I'm probably one of the older members of this House, that the aggressive language, the insulting, offensive language, and the threat to us by Venezuela at this time is probably worse than it's ever been in the history of this issue. We have seen the interception of vessels in our waters and various actions of flying over, as well as comments coming out more recently that accuse the Guyanese politicians, in difference between government and opposition, that they were servile, that the Guyanese politicians were servile politicians to Exxon and US imperialism. Unfortunately, Venezuela hasn't moved off of a certain track, ideological track. It only uses it when it becomes useful as a form of galvanizing support in their country. But the issue here today and historically, as I started to say, is that the one thing that one can trust in Guyana, even when we are loggerheads, one thing we can trust is the fact that whoever's in government and whoever is in opposition has lent unconditional support on the issue of Guyana's territory and integrity. And that must be worth something. That must be worth something in the fabric of our society. Whether it was Jagan as Prime Minister and Burnham, or whether it was Burnham as Prime Minister and Jagan as leader opposition, whether it was Tommy Reed as Prime Minister and Jagan, whether it was Chetty Jagan as President and leader opposition, Mr. Hoyt, whether it was Janet Jagan as President and Mr. Hoyt, whether it was Mr. Jagdeo as President and Mr. Corbyn, and going even closer forward, the relations between President Granger on this issue and the leader opposition, Jagdeo, in the 2015-2020 period. It is in 2014 that decision is made and the then Minister of Foreign Affairs writes to the UN calling to find other means under the Geneva Agreement to move the process forward. As we had been for decades in the Mixed Commission, we were in the decades in the Goodwill Officers process and got nowhere. And even when the Secretary General in 2017 named his own envoy, Nylander, to come and talk to both sides, Venezuela continued to be intractable in regards to this position. And hence, the Secretary General of the UN used his authority under the Geneva Agreement to take us to the ICJ, which is what we wanted. So this point here today is one that we must cherish always. It's priceless. Not many countries have the government and opposition coming together on one issue. We mustn't take it for granted. Of course, it's highly possible that tomorrow we will have a sitting maybe at some point and the claws will be out, the daggers will be out, of course, not literally, of course, to make score points with each other. But that's realpolitik, that's politics. But today is the day Today is the day for us as politicians, as Guyanese, to stand united. We must recognize too that we have faced many challenges, and yet ironically, Mr. Maduro maybe does not recognize the many efforts between various leaders of Venezuela and Guyana. The famous visit of Chavez to Guyana, in which was agreed that the border issue was back burner, and now it has come to front burner with Maduro, his protege. But I want to say it is no mere coincidence. On many occasions, as you go through the years, when these aggressions have emerged, there's a coincidence. And I believe that the reasons are clear for all of us. Venezuela, our neighbor, a country we've had trade with from 1958, a country that we sold rice and bought oil from in our hard times, a country that has welcomed thousands of Guyanese who went to Venezuela in our hard times. We must never forget that our people have left the country too, and they scattered themselves all around the world. It was estimated that 40,000 had gone to Suriname, 60,000 went to Venezuela, and everyone talks about, they estimate that there are more Guyanese in the diaspora than there are Guyanese in Guyana. But they have their difficulties now, and have been having it for quite a while, because the numbers of Venezuelans who are out of their country, who have chosen to leave their country, is approximately 6 million, which is a very large group of migrants who have not just decided to go to a holiday in Brazil, but decide to pick up their things and move. When we look at the figures of migrants coming from Venezuela, totals now approximately 22,417. The migration started around 2018, and you will remember that the Parliamentary Sectoral Committee on Foreign Services in the last Parliament had discussions on this issue of trying to find out about the migrants coming in, were they Guyanese, what conditions and what support they're being given. We must never ever lose our humanity, which is special to Guyana, I believe. We must never forget our humanity. Our people fled. We know that. Whether it was politics, whether it was hardships, whether the cost of living was high, all people of all ethnic groups left Guyana. Probably the indigenous people had an easier time because they lived near the border, crossed over and came back and forth, and that has been historically in Guyana. The borders have allowed our indigenous people on both sides to move back and forth freely, and sometimes even vote in both elections in Venezuela and in Guyana. But we must never forget our humanity. We, the former government, offered humanitarian assistance. We have offered humanitarian assistance, because certainly we must be our brothers' keepers and sisters' keepers. We are not a signature nor ratified the Convention on Refugees. And so it is very disturbing that we must not bow to xenophobia. I've been long enough in this parliament when the Brazilians started coming over to mine. And the Guyaneses, those of you who know what a Guyanese is, and mining and using more sophisticated mining equipment than we had at that time. And in this very parliament, not this building, but the parliament, there was a rash fear that 40,000 Brazilians were here and we would just become a colony of Brazil because the Brazilians are taking over with their music and their language and everything else. And that was in the 90s. Do you see that happening? Did it happen? Of course it didn't happen. It didn't happen. The migrants coming in from Venezuela are like migrants all over the world, and like our people who have been migrants elsewhere. They want a better life. They want a safer life. Those who are coming to Guyana are not your rich elite from Venezuela. They're not your big billionaires of Venezuela. Those catch on a flight and go to Miami and New York. We are here and we take care of people, as we do with all migrants. They're entitled to free health care. They're entitled to free education. They're entitled during a COVID pandemic to be vaccinated. We are responsible for all who are within our boundaries, regardless of our nationality. That is our responsibility at an international level and in terms of human rights. But the fact that when we plot and plan the events that have taken place over these decades and decades of independence is that there's always, it is matched whenever there are internal difficulties in Venezuela, especially around elections. And it is believed that where Venezuela uses the unsubstantiated, unproven, undefended claims to two-thirds of Guyana as a means to distract and galvanize support of its citizens on this belligerent, nationalistic, jingoistic propaganda against Guyana. Today, while we have been meeting, 2 songs have come out from Venezuela. One with some beautiful children singing Essequibo belongs to them. Of course, these are particularly orchestrated PR campaigns to carry out psychological warfare on the Guyanese people. This is what I think Mr. Granger may have called it one time, psych ops. The second song that came out just about an hour or so was showing Venezuelan soldiers, not in combat clothes, but in uniform, singing and marching and so, that Essequibo is theirs. So we are in a situation where Venezuela is also using this to galvanize, to mobilize their people to go vote on December 3rd, and also to vote at the elections in 2024. But Venezuela is also facing another deadline it has to deal with, and that is the submission of its counter memorial to the ICJ by March 2024. That's their deadline. Whether it is by the referendum, they want the majority to say we don't recognize ICJ, so you don't have to report. This is all an effort orchestrated to allow Venezuela to not stick to the ICJ process. It's finding one thing after another to pretend that it isn't important. But I want to comment one thing before I go on, and that is that the comments about migrants that were made by Honorable Amanza Walter Desir. I have said it, that migrants are migrants, and many of us have come from migrants. Our country is based on migrants, whether here voluntarily or not voluntarily. And the kaleidoscope of our nation is expanding. We have Haitians and Nigerians, Indians from India, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Chinese. That's who we are. We're a very diverse nation. And that is special to our country. It's unique to our country. Not to see it as a divisive thing, but to see it as our growing. In many countries, I've lived in Canada where in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a huge flux of migrants coming into Toronto from many parts of Europe and also from parts of South America. And the talk in the place was migrants taking over our jobs. Well, we have to be sane. We have to take information and analyze it and check, fact check. We have unemployment, yes, and so the government has the GOLD program, the GROW program, the WIN program to raise our people's standards. But also, we're facing very acute shortage of labor. And so, any migrants who come into our country and wish to work and work hard and be law-abiding, we are there to welcome them into our nation, to help us build our nation. There will always be bad eggs in every migrant group. And there may be, and you're right, that there are security threats and concerns. And I have confidence in the disciplined forces of Guyana and their intelligence gathering to be on top of what may be threats from those who are coming in. I don't wish to, and I've been on the defense board. I have sat at different levels. I don't wish to go in to be privy to some of the things that they have to do to make sure that our territory is safe. This moment that we're in, can you imagine if you're a migrant from Venezuela that you're frightened too? You're frightened too, because Guyanese are worried. It's their territory, it's our territory, but also they have no security of tenure. And so we don't need to escalate fear. We need to assure people that this is a place you ran to, you are safe. We will not encourage xenophobia in our nation. We have never done that before, and we should never do it in our history. But I believe that this point we're at, this point, is the worst and most menacing that we've seen in the long history of Venezuela's claim to 2/3 of our country's territory. And one of the most important developments that I think while we were preparing the motion and discussing between the government and the opposition to have an agreed on motion was the fact, and it's reflected in the 11th and whereas clause. Sorry, the 12th clause. And that was to look at, to approach the court for provisional measures to ensure that Venezuela would do nothing to interfere with our territory, and so to put a halt to any ambitions or any rabble-rousing regarding our territory. And I think this is an indication of the interest of the ICJ and the recognition of the threat that exists here right now. And so the request to call on the court to issue an order for provisional measures to prevent Venezuela from taking any action to seize, acquire, encroach upon, or assert or exercise sovereignty over the Essequibo River or any other part of Guyana's national territory, pending the court's final determination of, or any final determination of the validity of the arbitral award. The fact that we approached the court and we have a date with such rapidity, November 14th is the date when the court will hear the case, will hear our pleading, and the Venezuelans will have a right to respond, I assume. But this is important. The court doesn't always rapidly respond. That's not how they work. And so I think we can feel strengthened and assured that the fact that the court gave this a request of the government such importance. We can talk about many of the incursions and things that went wrong over the time, but I hope that the strength of the statements of the United Nations, the Commonwealth, the OAS, the CARICOM, nations at an individual level, will somehow get through to the Venezuelan nation that they're on a wrong course. This is a dangerous course, that they're in fact violating international law, and they're threatening a small country that does not have the means if we were to really be put against the Venezuelans. We have the power of our emotions and our strength as a people. but we do not wish this to escalate. The referendum itself is contrived. It is an engineered thing, again, to try to galvanize the Venezuelan people. And I came across a poll that was done. I can't swear by its legitimacy. It is Data Viva poll, and it did a poll concerning the consultative referendum on the Essequibo Guyana territory. It notes that 68% of those who were polled were convinced that they should participate in the December 3rd referendum, while 31% considered that it should not participate in the consultation on December 3rd. And so we mustn't put everybody into one pot. There are people out there who have no such interest of annexation, of pumping up one's chest and showing maps of the Zone de Reclamation, which offends us as Guyanese. It's an illegal map, and that one that should be shown nowhere at all. But we recognize the two questions that are most contemptuous. We recognize the total disregard for international law, that this is a brazen act of December 3rd to deny us our right to live within our agreed borders and to freely develop our resources of our entire nation. And as Minister Pauline pointed out, this by all definitions is active aggression. For the CARICOM and the countries in this hemisphere, this is a zone of peace and has been a zone of peace for decades. For many of the Latin American countries, it is not just Guyana that has a border issue with Venezuela. Venezuela has border issues with other countries, Colombia. There's probably not one nation in the South American continent that doesn't have a border issue with another country. So any act of aggression will make the entire South America very nervous and squeamish about what is taking on. And therefore, we know that we are not alone as a people. We are not alone. That because we have not been rabid, we have not been careless, we have not been reckless. We have stood for peaceful means by legal processes. We have painstakingly gone through the years and years of the Mixed Commission and the years and years of the goodwill and the final year with Mr. Nylander. And we all thought in a ministerial committee, which Mr. Greenwich, wherever he is, who headed that committee, of how painful it was dealing with that final year before we could move to the ICJ to convince the Secretary General that there was no go. There was no go. There was no giving, nothing. So the call by Maduro and his insults that we don't wish to negotiate is just hot air. We have dedicatedly been part of talks, and there are many people who have gone through that, and the goodwill ambassadors who were named by the Secretary General. Even the UN Secretary Generals were getting tired of a process that went nowhere. And so we have stuck to it. We have been honorable, we've been honorable partners on this issue. And we will continue to be honorable, because we will continue to stand for international law and the process of the International Court of Justice. And I'll give a different example of we had not delineated our maritime boundaries with Suriname. And when we approached the International Convention on the Sea to delineate those maritime boundaries, we got 97% of what we asked for. The Surinamese got 3%. an expensive operation, a long operation, costing a lot of money, but we were vindicated. And so we have trust in the international legal system. We've experienced it with the Suriname maritime boundaries. The important for all of us as Guyanese is that we have the right to self-determination. We're a nation, we have right to self-determination. We set our course, whether it's investors, whether we want to really create a truly democratic nation where everybody is equal and everybody has a chance and an opportunity to develop. This is our nation, and as we say in Creole, that our navel string bury. And maybe the young people navel strings weren't buried, but some of us, your mother had to bury a navel string in the ground. So we're tied to Mother Earth. All of us as Guyanese are tied to Mother Earth. This is ours, this is what we know. And so this is not the time for any of us Guyanese to prevaricate. And I'm very pleased that in this House so far, we've had one voice on the motion, we've had one voice that asserts our defense of our territorial integrity and sovereignty. This land, Guyana, is ours, and we as a people, no matter what our differences, must not quibble and hesitate. This is a matter of national importance as no other. Without our land, we do not exist as a country. And if we do not exist as a country, then what are we? I do not believe the Venezuelan people. I try to separate people from the government. But I do not believe the Venezuelan people want to annex Guyana. And I call on them and use this forum here to call on the Venezuelan people, the hardworking citizens of Venezuela, to reject question 3 and 5 on the referendum. Question 3 does not recognize the ICJ. And question 5, of course, we all know now, is calling for the annexation of our 2/3 of our country. I believe that the Venezuelan people are capable of reading through the lines. And this decision they're being asked to make will also have enormous impacts on their lives. It will bring no benefit, no progress to their country. It in fact do greater harm to their lives and their security. And so we need to talk to the Venezuelan people, not just to those who have access to the PR campaigns, and to be able, at 24 hours every day, they're churning out their psychological warfare. We just have to look at in the world right now and to see the destruction that annexation unilaterally does, when there's unilateral annexation by one country of another, what it does to the people, the nation, the future. And these stains don't go away, they last forever. So that we as Guyanese, in terms of the motion before us, whether we agree with everything or we don't agree with everything, the point is that we as a people are declaring through our elected representatives as one that we are affirming our support and recognition of the 1899 Arbiter Award and the 1966 Geneva Award Agreement, and that we stand by the 7 be it resolved clauses that affirms the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a state of Guyana. We reaffirm the recognition and acceptance of the 1899 award as full, perfect, and final. We denounce the provocative, unlawful, void, and of no international legal effect, the purported referendum in Venezuela that is scheduled for December 3rd. We support the government in its pursuit to ensure a peaceful and lawful resolution of the controversy before the International Court of Justice, and rejects the proposal to return to any form of dialogue with Venezuela on the controversy outside of the process of the court. That we support Guyana's formal approach for the urgent protection of the ICJ with the filing with the court a request for provisional measures for an order preventing Venezuela from taking any action to seize, acquire, encroach upon us, or assert or exercise sovereignty over the Essequibo River. We call for the deepening of engagements of all national stakeholders on issues relating to sovereignty and integrity, and that within the context of the meetings of the bipartisan Ministerial Advisory Committee on Guyana, Venezuela. As you may recall, this committee was originally set up when Minister Greenwich was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we in this government brought it over lock, stock and barrel as it was, including Mr. Greenwich, as part of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on the Guyana-Venezuela controversy. And so these are bilateral with both government and opposition. And you must also not take for granted that the fact that we as a people, when we went before November last year, before The Hague, the World Court, to hear Venezuela's objection to the jurisdictional decision of the court, that we went as a bipartisan team. And we will do that again for the November 14th, as far as I understand. The November 14th hearing in the International Court of Justice will also have a bipartisan team. Again, do not take this for granted. In many countries, that does not happen. And we need to celebrate, as a people, these small overtures and developments that bring us together. We encourage our citizens to remain fully engaged on developments surrounding the controversy. And again, as we've all said in speaking, we express our appreciation to our partners and friends at the international level, the regional level, who have come out with very, very clear messages, not waffling, but very clear messages to the Venezuelan government to desist from the line that they have taken and to stay within the international realm of the International Court of Justice. I want that in all of this, as Guyanese, because Guyanese who are coming in from Venezuela returned. Things were bad. Some will become citizens, some may not. Some may go back to Venezuela. But we have lost many migrants to different parts of the world. Some have come back, not many have come back. And so they choose their lives. That's their right to decide where they are. And for us to do the best that we can to make sure that we have a healthy, secure nation that offers the best that we can offer to our people, our citizens, and those who, for many reasons, who are in our borders that have chosen to be here or have been forced to be here. This is our responsibility as a nation to do what is right, that always we must be on the side of righteousness and justice, not on the side of bullyism, threats, and aggression. We hope that the Venezuelan government will see the light and desist from some of the very aggressive acts against Guyana. But even so, even if they continue, we will continue to look to the International Court, the UN, the Commonwealth, the OAS, the CARICOM, and our neighboring countries to stand firmly with us and not allow any incursion into our territory. As everyone has said, Guyana is ours, Essequibo is ours, our navel stringberry here. Maybe if that was translated into Spanish, it might not mean the same thing. But we are here, and it is our country, and we intend to do everything possible to make sure that Venezuela or any other in the future dares to try to take our territory away, that this is ours, and we belong here, and we love here, and we want to see our nation grow and develop for all of our people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. And now for the Honorable Member, Mr. Roysdale Ford, SC.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, all. In this season of Venezuelan aggression, I rise as a citizen of Guyana, ever more conscious of the role of the National Assembly in Guyana's body politics and that of every stakeholder vested in Guyana's interests. I rise conscious of how much the Guyanese people are counting on us, their elected representatives, to protect them and this beloved land from invaders. It is the duty of all of our political leaders to speak with one accord, to reassure all Guyanese, irrespective of race or political association, that they are valued, and it is our honor and privilege to protect, serve, and further the real interests of all. We are living in very serious and opportune times. How we navigate both realities will assert the Guyanese aspiration of one people, one nation, one destiny, or falling to the wayside, the consequence of self-serving leadership. In other words, would history record us in this moment of time swimming together or separately, uncaring whether we sink each other because we have not yet learned to appreciate that our lives and destiny are intertwined? While the naysayers may say otherwise, I paraphrase the sage advice of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, that we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will together perish as fools. We meet today to address the motion of Venezuela's continuous saber-rattling, the presumptuous lawlessness to think that we're going to sit silent and to allow them anywhere near our land and waters that are ours by right, as determined by the 1899 Arbitral Award and the international law of the sea. Mr. Speaker, consequent upon the Treaty of Washington in 1897 and the Arbitral Award of October 3, 1899, the boundary between what was then British Guyana and Venezuela was settled, and a boundary commission appointed comprising two British commissioners, Messrs. Perkins and Anderson, representing the British government, and two Venezuelan commissioners, Senores Abraham Terrado and Elias Toro, representing the Venezuelan government. The task of the commission was to demarcate on the ground the line of the boundary established by the Arbitral Award and to state it with clarity on an agreed map. The resultant borderline or boundary line was surveyed by the Commission between November 1900 and June 1904 and was set out on a map, an extract from which had been circulated to the honorable members and signed by the commissioners at Georgetown, British Guyana, on the 7th of January 1905. On the 9th of January 1905, a report was submitted by Mr. Perkins, the senior British boundary commissioner, to his principals and published in the official records of British Guyana for that year. It should be noted that two identical maps were drawn and jointly signed, one for the government of His Britannic Majesty and the other for the Venezuelans, containing all the enumerated details relating to the demarcation with a clear specification of the boundary line according to the Arbitral Award of Paris. On the 10th of January 1905, the British and Venezuelan commissioners signed a formal agreement at Georgetown, referring to the map previously signed by them and endorsing its accuracy and authenticity. Guyanese know on December 3rd that the Venezuelans will go to the polls to vote on 5 questions, which are paraphrased from our point of view. 1, do the Venezuelans agree to reject by all means the boundary line drawn by the 1899 Paris Arbitration Award, which gave Guyana Essequibo? do the Venezuelans support the 1966 Geneva Agreement as the only valid legal instrument to reach a practical and satisfactory solution for Venezuela and Guyana regarding the controversy over the territory of Essequibo? Thirdly, do the Venezuelans agree with the misguided historical position of not recognizing the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice to resolve the territorial controversy over Essequibo? And fourthly, do the Venezuelans agree to oppose Guyana's claim to dispose of our sea consistent with international law? And fifthly, do the Venezuelans agree with the creation of Guyana Essequibo State and the development of an accelerated plan for comprehensive care for the current and future population of our territory, which includes, among other things and others, the granting of citizenship and the identity card of Venezuela in accordance with the expired Geneva Agreement and violation of international law to covet the land which does not belong to them? Mr. Speaker, these questions represents Venezuela's latest unilateral act, the latest unilateral act in a long history of Venezuela's violation and disregard of treaties. The second question of the referendum seeks to state that the Geneva Agreement of 1966 is the only binding and valid agreement for the resolution for this controversy. We state that the Treaty of Washington and the arbitral award is the full, perfect, and final settlement of the controversy surrounding Essequibo. Let us remember that Venezuela has repeatedly breached Geneva Agreement and rebuffed efforts by Guyana to engage in bilateral talks with Guyana. Venezuela, in respect of the mixed commission established on the Geneva Agreement, has occupied half of the island of Ankoko in the middle of the Guyanese River in breach of this agreement. They have organized within the territory of Guyana clandestine meetings with indigenous chiefs, citizens of Guyana, in an unsuccessful attempt to delude them into supporting resolutions backing Venezuela's claim. And we have mentioned today, they have published in the London Times a paid advertisement saying that she would not recognize any development concessions in the Essequibo region. And they have sought to annex by presidential decree a 9-mile belt running along the coast of Essequibo of Guyana and extending within 3 miles of it. Our governments, particularly for which our party formed, on the 28th of June 1968 and the 18th of July 1968, rejected and rebuffed the Venezuelan efforts to take control of our lands by submitting to them notes of protest. Mr. Speaker, in these circumstances, Guyana cannot engage in any further bilateral and similar talks. Guyana should, must, and shall remain committed to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice for the resolution of the controversy. The people of Guyana deserve no less. The sun of Guyana sets in the Essequibo. There must be no further prolonged attempts by Venezuela to fabricate an eclipse of the sun of Guyana. Venezuela's increasing aggression is not only misplaced, but devoid of legitimacy. Even as we acknowledge these, we cannot ignore, in a world where might could supersede right, small nations such as ours must navigate these murky waters sensibly. Young Guyana, going back to 1965, has been unwavering in its commitment to abide by the 1899 arbitral award that settled the territorial dispute between then British Guyana and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela under the colonial leadership of Britain. Guyanese recall the presence of Premier Forbes Burnham during the 9th and 10th December 1965 at a high-level meeting with the Venezuelan foreign minister and the British Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, addressing the 7th November 1965 communique signed by representatives of Venezuela and Britain, along with a representative from British Guyana, to quote, find satisfactory solutions for a practical settlement of the controversy which had arisen as a result of the Venezuela contention that the 1899 award is null and void, end of quote. On the eve of independence, the Forbes-Burnham government pursued a path to resolve this issue through the Geneva Agreement, which the Desmond Hoyt government continued, and on expiration in 1990, pursued the good officer process, which lasted until 2017. In 2018, the David Granger Moses Nagamutu government approached the International Court of Justice, committed to the principle of peaceful resolution. This serves to remind us all, particularly the young Guyanese, who may be unaware or were led to believe differently, that any government the People's National Congress has been part of has consistently navigated this situation with due diligence and sense. In or out of government, the PNC remains committed to protecting and defending Guyana's sovereignty through peaceful and judicious means, legal and diplomatic. 55 years ago, the 12th of July 1968 to be exact, the then leader of the People's National Congress and the Prime Minister Forbes Burnham stood in this very National Assembly and said, and I quote, I cannot tell you with any certainty where this will lead, this ill-advised course of action on which the government of Venezuela has embarked. We must be prepared, however, for further and even more aggressive demonstrations of international lawlessness from the government of Venezuela. We need all our courage and our strength to withstand these efforts to break the will and despoil our land. Venezuela has made her intention clear to seek relentlessly to impose the yoke of colonialism on a young and small nation that has only recently succeeded in freeing itself from the tutelage of another imperial power. He continued, we have no quarrel with the Venezuelan people, but we shall not lack courage or resolve in resisting aggressive demands of a Venezuelan government that is prepared to defile the traditions of Bolivar and to flout the precepts of hemispheric and world order and security. In our stand for survival, we shall call upon the conscience of all peace-loving people to speak out in our cause, and we shall need all our unity as a people so that your voice may be heard in all the corners of the world and in the 11 councils of the world's institutions of peace. End of quote. When Mr. Burnham uttered those profound words that echo today in the halls of this building, he was addressing Guyana's statement on the Venezuelans' decree that purported to plan to annex part of the territorial waters and the contiguous zone of Guyana as part of Venezuela, lying along the coast of Guyana between the mouth of the Essequibo River and the Winey Point. We're here more than a century later, facing a threat of no lesser magnitude, and we cannot pretend that this issue is not a clear and present danger to every citizen of this beloved home and abroad. We are here a century later, more than a century later, after the arbitral award. Mr. Dave Martins captured in a song who we are as a people. I quote, we are a peaceful people. Struggle as we struggle. We don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. Again today, we fire this verbal warning shot to Venezuela. As a citizen, a parliamentarian, and a proud member of the PNC, I join with my colleagues in the APN UAFC and every Guyanese to reaffirm the position taken by the PNC historically, and in these times, all Guyana, in its present configuration, belongs to all of us. We accept the 1899 arbitral award as the final settlement of the dispute between Great Britain and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on the matter of the border. At the same time, all Guyanese are relieved to hear similar affirmation from the People's Progressive Party and the repudiating of any idea and any possibility of giving up a blade of grass, the consideration of an offer to Venezuela of a channel to the sea, or anything for that matter that could be construed as unpatriotic and threatening to our territorial integrity. I remind this House that the PPP leader and leader of opposition, Dr. Jagan, in his contribution on the 1968 resolution passed in this National Assembly on the 12th of July 1968 said, and I quote, "In the resolution, we would like to state that we agree that the Venezuelan decree should be considered a nullity, that the decree is a threat of aggression, and that the implementation of the decree should be considered an act of aggression. We are called upon by the government to approve of the government taking all necessary steps to secure the territorial integrity of Guyana. As I've said before, our position on this question is clear, quite clear. We made a point years ago. We put it in a nutshell when we said, not an inch of territory." I look over the seat of the person who now leads Dr. Jagan's party, and sometimes I wonder whether Dr. Jagan will know his party, support the view of the present leader who stunned the nation on the 23rd of October 2015, when he announced at a press conference that his party and government were considering to offer Venezuela a channel to the sea. How much more disturbing could such be a possibility in the face of the 1968 resolution passed by this House, rejecting and rebuffing a resolution of the government of Venezuela that required the armed forces of Venezuela to impose dominion of Venezuela over the belt of sea? How could that happen in the face of a resolution of this House that resolved to declare that the decree to be a nullity and approve of it being so treated by the government of Guyana insofar as it purports to relate to any part of the sea, including the territorial sea and the contiguous zone adjacent to any part of the coast of Guyana and to any part of the continental shelf forming part of the territory of Guyana. When the House passed a resolution to condemn the said decree as constituting an act of aggression against Guyana and as similarly likely to endanger the international peace and security, that denounced that act as an act of aggression against Guyana, done contrary to the Charter of the United Nations, and an attempt by the government of Venezuela to implement the said decree over part of the sea, including the territorial sea and the contiguous zone adjacent to any part of the coast of Guyana. How could it just have occurred when the House passed a motion to approve of the government of Guyana taking all necessary steps to secure the territorial integrity of Guyana, including its rights under international law and over the sea adjacent to our coast? Permit me, Mr. Speaker, to remind this House and all Guyana that Dr. Jagan in that debate said that we must not only deny Venezuelans radio time, but we must also restrict them in other places. And I quote his declaration, "Let them go home," he said. "Let them go home." It is amazing, Mr. Speaker, that Mr. Shearer will come here this afternoon. The honorable member will come here this afternoon and to present an image that the People's Progressive Party has been a party that has historically been accommodating of migrants. Mr. Speaker, the concerns of the Guyanese people are legitimate. A few days ago, I visited the Haslington area, and the only issue on the minds of the Guyanese people, because of the proximity of this debate, was the situation of Venezuela. And there were concerns about the entry and the unregulated entry, the unplanned permission on migration, and the almost open facilitation of a number of persons from Venezuela coming into this country. Mr. Speaker, there could be no denial that the infrastructure of Guyana can't support that sort of migration. Whilst the Honorable Teixeira speaks of a very progressive position, obviously, comparing what Dr. Jagan said to now, the Honorable Member did not capture the reality of what is happening in Guyana. One of the very first acts of the current PPP government was to impose a visa restriction against Haitians, persons who are entitled to the free movement of travel within CARICOM. Mr. Speaker, though we join this government, which is our right to do so, and is our obligation to do so, to stand and defend our country against Venezuela, I wish to remind this Honorable House, Mr. Speaker, that in the course of my budget presentations in 2020 and 2021, I said the same thing using exactly the same phrase. And this is what I said. Completely overlooked again in the budget speech is the need for a comprehensive citizenship, immigration, border policy. I said it, Mr. Speaker. Today, even in the stage that we are in the face of this crisis, this government has failed to bring before us legislation to govern immigration and access in this country. I reject as acceptable, Mr. Speaker, for the Honorable Member Teixeira to give us this sort of laissez-faire approach that anybody could simply cross into our country and somehow we have to accept and bear it. She acknowledged, Mr. Speaker, she acknowledged that Guyana is not a signatory to any convention on migration. Trinidad is not and Tobago is not a signatory to any convention, and they are sending back home the Venezuelans. I believe that this matter needs to be addressed. The brushing of it onto the above and off the table, onto the carpet, vacuum it out, was not sufficient. It does not address the concerns of the Guyanese people on a very important issue. Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly must therefore be unanimous in conviction and purpose on the Venezuela-Guyana border controversy. All and any doubts must be removed that successive governments and the people of Guyana, including the PPP, are not engaged in any nefarious or questionable activities that compromise Guyana's interests. Guyana deserves a peaceful and lawful resolution of this controversy, as led by the Burnham government, to where the matter is presently before the ICJ, as placed by the Granger-Nagamutu government. The people of Guyana must hold their elected leaders accountable to this, failing for which will be complicit with any action taken by this government or any other government that does not serve the interests of the nation and its citizens. The last thing, Mr. Speaker, we who are alive today would want is a repeat of the Malay Provost situation. The lawyer who represented Venezuela in the arbitral tribunal and reportedly requested after his death the release of a 1944 memorandum attacking the 1899 arbitral award on an allegation that the award was a political deal between Britain and Russia. Whilst Malo Prevost contention could not be further from the truth, given the 1897 treaty that formed the basis for the award, both Venezuela and Britain agreed, and I quote, to consider the result of the tribunal as a full, perfect, and final settlement of all the questions referred to the arbitrators, end of quote. Nothing from the grave must haunt us. Malo Prevost's contention lacks evidence, but is being used by Venezuelans to stir up trouble which we must be guarded against. Hence, it is important to condemn and relinquish any notion of discussing a deal with Venezuela, because, as we sing, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. As Forbes Burnham said in 1968 in his presentation in this House, we are convinced that justice is on our side, and our case can stand thorough scrutiny from any quarter. Having addressed our attention to the issue of reaffirming our commitment to the peaceful and legal resolution to the border controversy and the condemnation of Venezuela's aggression, I turn my attention to the internal management of the state. Guyanese are reminded that the strength of our external defense lies in the cohesion within the state. The disquiet and the rumblings of Guyanese in this oil-rich and the world's fastest growing economy are increasing. Guyanese are growing intolerant with the pervasive social, economic, and political injustices, particularly when they are entitled to fair treatment. Of this government must be reminded that the turning of a blind eye, pretending that there is no societal dysfunction, could lead to grave consequences. We are of one people, one nation, one destiny. And every Guyanese must feel that he or she has a stake in this beloved country and will be treated with dignity and respect. This is where sometimes the government and our party don't seem to share the same beliefs. We believe in the national motto, not a misguided, visionless, poorly executed one Guyana policy, which is not only myopic, but anti-national, unpatriotic. It feeds internal divisions and external forces to exploit in the furtherance of their national interests. It is important for this House to record and for all Guyanese to know that whilst we stand in solidarity with the government and all Guyana on this motion, we will take a momentarily brief pause on our continuous argumentation on this side of the House in relation to the discriminatory management of the state, the continued abuse of public servants and teachers, and unionized workers' rights to collective bargaining. For a moment, we will take a break from our argumentation in relation to the demolition of the guardrails of democracy and the government's apparent determination to create a one-party state. For a moment, we will stand back from President Ali's violation of the Constitution and the contempt of court for not ruling or not participating in...
Honorable member, you will have to withdraw that reference to President Ali.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw it. We will not stand for the violation of the Constitution and the contempt of the court on the substantive appointment of the Chancellor and Chief Justice. The court ruled on the 26th of April 2023 that any protracted or further delay in complying with Article 127(1) of the Constitution is inimical to the independence of the judiciary as set out in Article 122 of the Constitution. For a moment, we will take a break, Mr. Speaker, from complaining and standing up against the demolition of homes. We will take a break today because we stand together for all Guyana in relation to the failure to provide equitable allocation of resources across the country. For a moment, we are concerned and remain concerned about the issue of poverty and the failure of the government to reduce it in a systematic manner. The government's continuous collapse of the education sector, where more than half of the children in the world's fastest growing economy are not literate. Mr. Speaker, we take a break today and join the government in support of this motion, despite the failure to provide proper health services across the country and the inability to provide a basic medication to those in need. Mr. Speaker, we take a break today just for a moment, just for a pause, from continuing to address the issue of the lack of accountability in the management of the oil sector and its proceeds, and the allocation of contracts to the tune of billions of dollars to PPP's friends, families, and favorites. Mr. Speaker, we stand for inclusionary democracy as outlined in Article 13 of the Constitution, and we demand the inclusion of all stakeholders, organizations, and individuals in the matter of the Venezuela-Guyana border controversy and every aspect of the management and decision-making process of the state that impact the well-being of the citizens and their representative bodies. To state allegiance, we on this side of the House pledge to cherish and defend all 83,000 square miles and the 53,347.7 square miles of our exclusive economic zone from foes, external, and any who dare to think they can attack us from within. This land and waters are ours. From the Rupununi to the Corentyne, from the green hard forest to the Atlantic waters, this land was made for you and me. Mr. Speaker, we stand united, and all Guyanese are united, on the fact that Essequibo is the territory of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, we stand united, and all Guyanese are united on the fact that the arbitral award of 1899 is a full, perfect, and final settlement of this controversy. Mr. Speaker, we stand united, and all Guyanese are united on the fact that the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice is the only legitimate forum for the clarification of this controversy. Mr. Speaker, I say Guyanese are united. For, as Forbes Burnham said on the 17th of July 1968 in his presentation to this House, when this House agrees unanimously, it is the voice of the majority, the overwhelming majority. Mr. Speaker, the PPP therefore has a duty to partner with our side of the House, our party, and civil society as a whole, and sincerely fight for this land, its institutions and symbols of state, the welfare of each citizen, and everything under Guyana's skies. Political leaders must show the world that in this moment, in this time, when issues required putting the Guyanese people first and putting the Guyanese nation first over self, we stood up and we delivered. Mr. Speaker, I stand on and affirm the immortal words of Forbes Burnham, who said in this House, as I previously referred to in that speech, and I quote, "We are agreed that Venezuela, notwithstanding whatever friendships there may be at the social and personal levels, is an imperialist aggressor. We are agreed on that. Our collaboration in this question is indeed an anti-imperialist exercise. In the final analysis, Mr. Speaker, even if we have no friends with weapons, or be prepared to supply us with weapons, or assist us with weapons, we Guyanese people have faith in ourselves. And come to Venezuelans, to every 1,000 blows, we shall be prepared to deal one dead blow. And even if we have to die, we shall not die like hawks, but like men." I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. And now for the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, the Honorable Member, Mr. Mohabir Anil Nandlal, SC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a Guyanese, as a Member of Parliament, as Attorney General, it is indeed a great privilege for me to be afforded an opportunity to speak on this momentous occasion, on this motion that is of fundamental national importance that is before us today. The tone, the atmosphere, and the climate that ought to have governed and has in the main permeated the debate today has been largely fashioned and structured by the importance of the issue at hand, the responsibility and duty that we owe to this nation state as her children, and more latterly, born out of an engagement between His Excellency the President and the Leader of the Opposition. And if I read the signals correctly, we were supposed to come here and speak in one united voice for the protection of our territorial integrity and our nation's sovereignty. We had agreed by common sense and decency and political pact. We agreed to suspend all rancor, rhetoric, and petty politics. And as I've said, in the main, we have observed that. And where we have departed, where we have faltered, on behalf of the people of Guyana, I offer them our apologies. There are two things that I want to say quickly, simply because it is wrong to leave them on the record. I don't wish to traverse what the honorable member who preceded me said on many matters, but there are two things that are simply too dangerous to leave on the public record. One is the allegation that a PPP leader made certain statements that would lend to the interpretation and inference that we are ceding territorial sovereignty to Venezuela. I want to reject that contention absolutely. And there is another contention that I want to traverse. And it is that my distinguished elder, the Honorable Madam Gail Teixeira, in advocating in accordance with international law the fair treatment of those who come to this land as refugees, is something, when we did it, we committed some error and somehow compromise our position on this question of sovereignty. All we are doing, as articulated by the Honorable Gail Teixeira, is complying with international law. And those who lack the strategy or the intellectual depth to appreciate that if ever there is a moment in our history when we must demonstrate our compliance with international law, it is now. It is now. We cannot invoke international law in our protection, in our aid, when we trample upon international law when the occasion presents itself. Having put those matters to rest, I will now move to the text of my presentation. Your Honor, permit me to begin with Article 2 of our Independence Constitution, emulating, of course, the path already traveled by my distinguished colleague, the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs. That document in Article 2, declares the territory of the state as comprising the areas that immediately before the commencement of the Constitution, that is, before the 26th of May 1966, those areas of the territory that was British Guyana is now Guyana. And that is the fundamental declaration from our supreme law and our most supreme legal instrument giving birth to the nation state of Guyana. For the purpose of this debate, the boundaries of this landmass, which we know as Guyana, were conclusively and lawfully carved out since the turn of the 20th century in 1905. So from this manifestly settled position, stretching over 100 years, how then have we arrived at this place today, where Guyana faces an existential threat of conquest of nearly 2/3 of that very territory by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela? And this is the issue that I want to interrogate. And in so doing, permit me, Mr. Speaker, because I will run the risk of traveling path already treaded by speakers before me. But I've chronicled my own understanding of this historical narrative, attaching to it my own emphasis and my own nuances, which I believe are important to place on the record of this assembly. In the second half of the 19th century, a dispute regarding the location of the boundary between Venezuela and then British colony of British Guyana arose. The United States took Venezuela's side in the dispute based on its Monroe Doctrine, by which it opposed territorial claims by European colonial powers in the Americas. Tensions rose to such a level that the United States even threatened war against Britain, but diplomacy prevailed. I pause here to remind that this was the time when America-US hegemony was being birthed, nurtured, and engendered. It was the time of the Monroe Doctrine, the Manifest Destiny, and Roosevelt's corollary. Facilitated by the United States, in 1897, Venezuela and Great Britain concluded an agreement, the Treaty of Washington, by which they agreed to submit the dispute regarding the location of the boundary to binding arbitration before a tribunal of eminent jurists, including the head of the judiciary of the United States and Great Britain. And this entire process was consensual, and Venezuela sat and participated at every step of this process. On the 3rd of October 1899, the arbitral tribunal delivered its award, which determined the boundary between Venezuela and British Guyana. The 1899 award was the culmination of arbitral proceedings during which the respective territorial claims of Great Britain and Venezuela were addressed at great length and in detail by distinguished legal counsel representing the two states, including many thousands of pages of written submissions and more than 200 hours of oral hearing before that tribunal. Under the terms of the Treaty of Washington, Great Britain and Venezuela agreed that they would, and I quote, consider the result of the proceedings of the Tribunal of Arbitration as a full, perfect, and final settlement, unquote, of all matters referred to the tribunal. Indeed, history has recorded Venezuela as interpreting the award as favorable to them and celebrated it as a victory. And indeed, it was. They won the arbitral award. They, in the main, got almost everything that they were asking for. The Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs gave you the landmass and its comparative size to the entire Guyana, which they were able to secure from that arbitral award. And they rightly celebrated it as their victory. For more than 6 decades after the 1899 award was delivered, Venezuela treated the award as a final settlement of the matter. It consistently recognized, affirmed, and relied upon the 1899 award. Again, I quote, and they keep using the terminology whenever they were prosecuting the case for the award. A full, perfect, and final determination of their boundary dispute with British Guyana. During that 60 years, they published maps, they signed international documents, they published stamps, and we have before, in our case at the ICJ, a bundle of exhibits of all Venezuela's national expressions, embracing, recognizing, affirming, and reaffirming that boundary in accordance with the arbitral award. In particular, between 1900 and 1905, Venezuela participated in a joint demarcation of the boundary in strict adherence to the letter of the 1899 award and emphatically refused to countenance even minor technical modifications of the boundary line described in the award. They were the one, during the demarcation of the boundary disputes, of the boundary with Brazil in particular. It is the award, and in the negotiations with Brazil, they were unprepared to cede an inch from that award, the letter and spirit of that award. Venezuela proceeded to formally ratify the demarcated boundary in its domestic law. So it went to Parliament and it passed its domestic laws now, incorporating as part of the corpus of the laws of Venezuela the pith and substance of that arbitral award. And thereafter published official maps which depicted the boundaries following the line described in the 1899 award. In July 1928, Venezuela concluded a boundary agreement with Brazil that expressly confirmed the trijunction point of the boundaries of British Guyana, Venezuela, and Brazil as described in the 1899 award. Consequently, it means that in the laws of Brazil now, that award is entrenched, it is recognized, and it is asserted as part of the demarcation tool by which that trijunction boundary was ascertained. So not only in Venezuela law, you have it in the laws of Brazil as well. As British, so for more than 60 years, Venezuela gave effect to that award and never raised a concern as to its validity or binding effects. 6 decades of positive adherence, both at the national level and at the international level, by any act, whether under domestic law or international law, in any civilized legal system, on any part of planet Earth. If a party has committed an act consistently for 60 years, no legal system will allow him to reprobate from that approbated act. And there's a question of principle of law, both at the international level and at the national level. And that is the hurdle, one of the many hurdles that they have to face. And they have everything that they have done over the past 60 years, over that period, that they now have to undo. How they will do it, I don't know. As British Guyana's independence approached in early 1960s, however, Venezuela abruptly and drastically changed track. After more than half a century of recognition, affirmation, and reliance, Venezuela sought to repudiate the 1899 award for the first time. On the basis of that departure from its long-standing recognition of the award, Venezuela began to make far-reaching and aggressive claims that it was entitled to 3/4 of Guyana's sovereign territory. In the decades since Guyana attained independence, Venezuela has continued to advance those claims with increasing menace and in disregard of the impact of its claims on Guyana and the wider region. Venezuela's words have been reinforced by aggressive actions, including unlawful occupation of Guyana's sovereign territory, interception of vessels in Guyana's territorial waters, and various other actions designed to interfere with and prevent economic development activities authorized by Guyana in its territory west of the Essequibo River. Venezuela's contention of nullity on the eve of Guyana's independence set in train a protracted process during which Venezuela was given every opportunity to explain, investigate, and substantiate the allegations underlying its new contentions, including by appointing a panel of experts to review previously confidential archival materials relating to the 1899 award. They were given another opportunity when they made this allegation for the first time to go back into the records, review it. They hired a team of experts and come up with something of substance. Despite this extensive investigation, Venezuela was unable to produce any documentary evidence to support its contention that the arbitral award or any of its members acted improperly in carrying out their mission to determine the boundary between Venezuela and British Guyana. Nevertheless, Venezuela persisted with its claim that the award was null and void due to such alleged impropriety. On the 17th of February 1966, the government of the United Kingdom, Venezuela, and British Guyana concluded the Geneva Agreement. This was intended to establish a binding and effective mechanism for achieving a permanent resolution of the controversy arising from Venezuela's repudiation of the 1899 award. And I'll come back to the Geneva Agreement because we are glossing over this Geneva Agreement. Following, under the auspices of the Geneva Agreement, a mixed commission was established for the purpose of seeking satisfactory solutions for the practical settlement of the controversy arising from Venezuela's contention of nullity. The mixed commission held numerous meetings during its 4-year term between 1966 and 1970, but was unable to make any progress towards the settlement of the controversy. Following a 12-year moratorium between 1970 and 1982 and a 7-year period of consultations on the means of settlement between 1983 and 1990, the parties then engaged in a 27-year good office process under the authority of the United Nations Secretary General between 1990 and 2017, including a 1-year enhanced mediation process. Once again, all these processes yielded no significant process towards the resolution of this controversy. Venezuela has been afforded ample time and opportunity to explain and substantiate its contention of nullity under the various procedures established under the Geneva Agreement. In the 6 decades since it first formally sought to question the validity of the 1899 award, nevertheless, it has adduced no evidence that is remotely capable of substantiating its claim that the award was a product of coercion, collusion, fraud, or some other nullifying factor. On the contrary, the evidence overwhelmingly confirms what Venezuela itself accepted more than half a century, namely, the 1899 award was lawful, conclusive, and binding delimitation of the party's boundaries. And I want to digress here a little to investigate with you this sudden change after 60 years by Venezuela. How did it evolve and originate? On the 14th of December 1960, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution, number 1514, titled the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. This historic resolution called upon all colonial powers, inter alia, to respect the right of self-determination of their colonized people, including the right to choose independence from colonial rule. 1 year later, on the 18th of December 1961, the Premier of British Guyana, Dr. Cheddi Jagan, petitioned the Special Political and Decolonization Committee of the General Assembly to support the political independence of his country. In response, the UK informed the General Assembly that it would soon hold a constitutional conference on the independence of British Guyana. Within 1 month of Dr. Jagan's petition, on the 15th of January 1962, Venezuela delivered a memorandum to the United States Department of State in Washington, indicating that it would bring its complaint to the attention of the UN General Assembly to delay British Guyana's independence and calling for negotiations with the United Kingdom to reach agreement on a new border with British Guyana. The memorandum to the US Department of State took pains, and I want you to pay careful attention now, because you will see how Venezuela is shifting its case within its case. The memorandum to the US Department of State, that's the memorandum from Venezuela to the US Department of State, took pains to make it clear, however, that Venezuela, quote, was not questioning the legality of the arbitral award, unquote. This is what the US State Department said on the matter, and I quote, "Inasmuch as Venezuela has long cherished the aspiration of having the 1899 arbitral award revised, it felt obliged to put its aspirations on the record of the United Nations. Venezuela was not questioning the legality of the arbitral award. I repeat, Venezuela was not questioning the legality of the arbitral award, but felt it was only just that the award should be revised, since it was handed down by a tribunal of 5 judges which did not include on it any Venezuelans." That was their false contention. They're not challenging legally, but 60 years after they participated in the composition and constitution of the tribunal, they come now belatedly to say no Venezuelan was on that tribunal, and on that basis they are objecting. I continue, yes, as my friend is reminding me, they nominated the people who sat at the tribunal. I continue with the quote. "Venezuela believes that the 2 British judges and so-called neutral Russian judge had colluded in arriving at a decision to support the British claims. and only valiant actions by the two US judges prevented the award from recognizing the extreme British claim. This is after they won. They won. For these reasons, Venezuela considers the award to have been inequitable and questionable from a moral point of view. Unquote. From a moral point of view. Despite Venezuela's assurance to the United States that it was not questioning the legality of the 1899 award, just 1 month later, it changed its position and did exactly that. In a letter from its permanent representatives to the United Nations, Dr. Carlos Sosa Rodriguez, to the UN Secretary General UTANT, dated 14th of February 1962, Venezuela declared for the first time that, quote, it cannot recognize an award that was the result of a political transaction, unquote. The basis of Venezuela's claim that the 1899 award was the product of political compromise arose out of a memorandum allegedly drafted on the 8th of February 1944 by Venezuela's counsel in the arbitral proceedings. Now here is where the basis for where they got this belief and change of mind from. It was from a memorandum that the lawyer who participated in the case 40 years ago, he wrote something, put it in an envelope, and said that it must not be opened after he died. It will be noted that this was some 45 years after the award. The document was only made public in 1949, a month after the death of the author. I think it's my distinguished colleague, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, pointed out that it was so conveniently structured that the maker of the document cannot be questioned or could not have been questioned. And I'm learning that the original document cannot be found. So this was an edict that was coming from a grave, in essence. It made a bizarre allegation that the Russian chairman of the tribunal essentially conspired with British judges to give more land to Great Britain, and in exchange, Great Britain would allow Russian influence in the hemisphere. No documents were cited in support of this allegation, and no other supporting evidence whatsoever produced or referenced. Naturally, the British government emphatically rejected Venezuela's 1962 contention at the United Nations and made it abundantly clear that this matter was already settled by the arbitral award of 1899, and consequently that the frontier had already been demarcated by the Boundary Commission jointly appointed by British and Venezuelan governments and recorded in an agreement signed on the 10th of January 1905. The question that one may ask now is, if this was a settled question, if this was a settled position of Great Britain, why then did it sign another agreement in Geneva on the 17th of February 1966? And I want to dilate a little on that issue. The Deputy Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom at the UN, Mr. Colin Crowe, not Kroll, Colin Crowe, who dealt with the matter, made it abundantly clear on repeated occasions that the British government did not accept that there was a boundary dispute, as it considered the matter conclusively and perfectly settled by the arbitral award. So going into the Geneva Agreement now, I want to paint what I understand to be the mindset of the British government. This is on the eve of us attaining independence. So it was the British government acting on our behalf. And it is important that we understand the minds of the parties when they were going into the Geneva Agreement, and that will inform our interpretation of the language expressed. Because when you interpret any legal instrument, the purpose of the interpretation is to understand the intent of those who made it. And I'm trying to dilate a little here to explain the mindset of the gentleman who negotiated the agreement, the Geneva Agreement, and did the preparatory work to the signing of the agreement. However, British Guyana was proceeding to independence, and Britain feared that given Venezuela's change of position, a new and independent Guyana would be vulnerable to a military seizure of its territory by a far superior Venezuelan armed forces. And that was not an unreasonable and unjustifiable fear at that time. It is in those circumstances, and while maintaining most resolutely that Venezuela's claim was entirely without merit, that Mr. Crowe made a proposal to the UN for a peaceful resolution of the controversy. Crowe made it clear that this was not, I quote, an offer to engage in substantive talks about revision of the frontier, unquote, as this had been settled by the arbitral award in 1889. Instead, he explained the British's offer was intended only, and I quote again, to dispel any doubts which the Venezuelan government may still have about the validity or propriety of the arbitral award. It was really to investigate the circumstances of the award, not the text. We have gone much further. We have submitted the entire thing to the United Nations for review. So magnanimous we have been as a nation state. In short, it is common knowledge that the Geneva Agreement outlines several processes for engagement. It is common knowledge that several of these processes were activated but yielded no success. It is in these circumstances that the government of Guyana invoked Article 4 of the Geneva Agreement. In short, this article prescribes that if the channels employed did not bring a resolution of the dispute, then the UN Secretary General can recommend any of the processes laid out in Article 33 of the Charter of the United Nations. It is in the exercise of this power, upon the request of the government of Guyana, that the UN Secretary General refer the controversy to the International Court of Justice, the principal judicial arm of the United Nations, for resolution. And that is where the matter remains up to now. As a member of the United Nations, and by virtue of the Charter of the United Nations, which has the force of and is recognized as part of that corpus forming international law, Venezuela is bound by the Charter and by decisions of the United Nations. It is also bound to comply with and accept the jurisdiction of all UN organs, including the International Court of Justice, save on very limited grounds. As an expression of sovereignty, it can refuse to submit to the jurisdiction of that court on those limited grounds. Those grounds do not exist in this case. It is for this specific reason that the court chose to hear arguments on jurisdiction in limine before proceeding to deal with the merits of the case. The court was very careful. It was dealing with a sovereign state that has a right, as an expression of its sovereignty, not to submit to an international tribunal on certain stated grounds. The court allowed a hearing to take place to fully ventilate that issue before it made its ruling. This jurisdictional question was thoroughly interrogated by the court. Venezuela first refused to participate, but eventually did. And in a ruling delivered in December 2020, the court made it abundantly clear that it has jurisdiction to hear and determine the case. And that concluded whatever ability Venezuela had not to subject itself to the jurisdiction of the court. Once the court makes a ruling, Venezuela is bound under international law by it. Perhaps Venezuela recognizes that its case at the court is hopeless. Faced with that very real prospect and an impending general elections in an environment of great economic depression and resultant social chaos, the Maduro administration has chosen the controversial referendum as a silver lining in the dark clouds hanging over that society. In the meanwhile, Guyana continues resolutely upon its reliance on international law and the process engaged at the International Court of Justice. Additionally, we have been able to secure from some of the most powerful voices in this hemisphere expressions of support and solidarity. These have come from the United States, the United Kingdom, the Caribbean Community, the Commonwealth, the Organization of American States, the European Union, Brazil, etc. I just returned from the Interparliamentary Union, the largest assembly of parliaments in the world, and there the Speaker and the Clerk were also there, and my sister Dawn Hastings, and we received expression of support from dozens of parliaments across the globe. I take this opportunity on behalf of the government and people of Guyana to offer our most profound gratitude to all these organizations and the many people across the globe who have stood with us in this moment of tribulation. I wish to offer them also our warmest congratulations for standing on the side of the rule of law, diplomacy, justice, and peace. It is now common knowledge that Guyana has approached the International Court for certain interim measures. Anyone familiar with the curial process would know that a party in a litigation has a right to seek appropriate legal remedies interlocutorily if the other party in the litigation is taking steps that can defeat, compromise, or render nugatory the legal proceedings itself and or its final outcome. At the same time, every court has a duty to protect the integrity of its process and proceedings before it. In short, it has an inherent and unmitigating duty to prevent its process from abuse. Guyana is of the considered view that the impending referendum slated for the 3rd of December 2023 is intended to and will compromise the legal proceedings pending at the International Court of Justice, if not subvert the legal process altogether and prejudice its outcome. And that is why we are approaching that court. I have elucidated the historical evolution of this controversy in such detail with the hope that every citizen of Guyana, here and abroad, can acquaint themselves with the material facts and become fully engaged on the developments surrounding this controversy. As a government, we hope the National Assembly, without its usual rancor, but speaking in unison with one voice, will send that clear and present signal that this is not an issue upon which we are or can be divided, but one on which we are unconditionally united. The existential nature of this threat, of the threat at hand, leaves us with no alternative. Similarly, we expect a deepening engagements among all national stakeholders on this matter of fundamental national importance. What is at stake here is our nation's sovereignty. By Article 9 of our Constitution declares that sovereignty belongs to the people. It therefore means that we, the people of Guyana, are at stake, and so is our country. In our short history as a nation state, if there was ever a time to transform the words of our national pledge, our national anthem, and our national songs into action, that time is now. That commitment which we make every time we sing our national anthem must reverberate into actions across this land. I quote, "Dear land of Guyana, to you will we give our homage, our service, each day that we live. God guard you, great mother, and make us to be more worthy our heritage, land of the free," unquote. Before I conclude, I must issue a cautionary admonition to all our citizens. Be careful with what you say and do, in particular on the social media. Irresponsible publication will only increase existing tensions. While we must stand strong in the expression of our patriotism, we must not commit acts which can be viewed as provocative. Neither must we ill-treat our Venezuelan brothers and sisters among us. In the main, they are here simply to pursue a better life. I end with a quote from our national poet, Martin Carter, who said, "All are involved, all are consumed." I support absolutely and fully the motion that is on the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Attorney General. And now for the Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Brigadier Mark Phillips.
Mr. Speaker, I stand on all protocols previously observed. I stand before you today to address a critical matter of concern facing our country. A matter that threatens our sovereignty as a nation and which has plagued our history for more than a century, as you would have heard before from the previous speakers. The continued unlawful and baseless claim by Venezuela to more than 2/3 of Guyana's national territory. A claim that goes directly against the 1899 arbitral award between British Guyana and Venezuela. Mr. Speaker, I submit to you at the start of my discourse this afternoon that Essequibo belongs to Guyana. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to say it in Spanish. So, President Nicolas Maduro, known as Compañero Maduro, understand me clearly. Essequibo pertenece a Guyana. Essequibo pertenece a Guyana. Essequibo pertenece a Guyana. Loud and clear to Compañero Maduro. Mr. Speaker, Venezuela's appeals to peace and international law are those of an aggressor with evil intent. They are not real. Mr. Speaker, I wish at this stage to compliment our Foreign Service officers and our officers and ranks of the Guyana Defense Force and the Guyana Police Force for keeping us secure as a nation in the observance that diplomacy being our first line of defense. They have acquitted themselves well. And we can stand here today and say Essequibo belongs to Guyana because of the work of our Foreign Service officer, because of the work of our police force and Guyana Defense Force in securing our borders and defining aggression 24/7 for us. Mr. Speaker, 2,500 years ago, the historian and military general Thucydides, writing on the Peloponnesian War, said, and I quote, "Right as the world goes is only in question between equals in power, while the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, today in 2023, that does not apply because we have the United Nations. The United Nations to which all states, over 200 states, that is, belong, and which is supposed to mediate relations between and among them in the spirit of multilateralism. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, the story of this controversy is long and arduous. Still, despite Guyana's consistent attempts to cooperate and act with diplomacy and integrity as a nation and follow international standards with regards to settling this controversy, the continued attempts by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to disrupt our territorial sovereignty and threaten the peace and stability of our region must be addressed steadfastly. Mr. Speaker, to be clear, I wish to emphatically condemn the unwarranted and unjust claims by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on our sovereign territory. The international community has rallied behind us, recognizing the injustice we face, and we call upon all nations to support our cause. However, Mr. Speaker, I pause to caution. Today, we are sending a message of unity in the face of a clear and present danger from the Nicolas Maduro government of Venezuela. Mr. Speaker, we must guard against simultaneously politicizing this topic for political gains, which are deemed selfish. If Guyanese are not mobilized around this issue, it becomes a lost cause. Mr. Speaker, our nation has a long and storied history that predates any territorial controversy, any territorial dispute. Our history is lined with the origins of our indigenous people who have inhabited our lands for generations, and the subsequent arrivals of the Africans, Indians, Chinese, Portuguese, and Europeans as a result of the Atlantic slave trade. Mr. Speaker, our sovereignty over this territory means everything to our people, whose ancestors made Guyana their home. Our position is non-negotiable, and this is a fundamental right that all nations must respect. Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that the claims made by Venezuela are baseless and a blatant disruption of our territorial integrity. Our people and our government have endured threats and aggression for far too long. Venezuela has shown inconsistency, as you would have heard from several speakers before, in its commitment to following the 1899 Arbitral Award, which determined the boundary between Guyana and between Venezuela and British Guyana, though having treated the award as a final settlement for more than 6 decades. Then in 1944, Venezuela invoked a secret memorandum purportedly authored by Severo Male Prevost, a junior member of Venezuela legal team at the 1899 Arbitral Award, and has since made continued actions to question the award despite its initial acceptance. Guyana's willingness to cooperate was evident in the Geneva Agreement between British Guyana and Venezuela, and I quote, "to resolve the controversy between Venezuela and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland over the frontier between Venezuela and British Guyana," end of quote. Our cooperation was further evident in the good offices process of 1990 to 2017, as you heard before, conducted by the United Nations Secretary General to find a solution to the matter. But in 2018, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres determined that the good offices process has not resolved the territorial dispute between Guyana and Venezuela. And thus, Mr. Speaker, Venezuela's determination to uphold conflict persists. Mr. Speaker, when the UN Secretary General referred the matter to the International Court of Justice to determine the validity of the claims, Guyana dutifully filed a request with the ICJ in that regard. Venezuela's claim at that time was that Secretary General Guterres had exceeded his authority, the same authority that has been relied upon and trusted for 27 years during the good offices process, and further refused to recognize the ICJ's jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, Guyana continued to follow the rule of law and invoke Article 53 of the ICJ statute, allowing the court to rule in their favor if only one party failed to participate. In December 2020, the court established its jurisdiction in the case. It set deadlines for the submission of legal documents by both parties, and in June 2022, Venezuela raised a preliminary objection to the admissibility of Guyana's claims, leading to a suspension of proceedings. Guyana responded in July 2022, and oral arguments were heard in November 2022. On April 6, 2023, the court issued a final judgment ruling that Venezuela's preliminary objection is admissible, rejecting it by a majority vote, and allowing the court to proceed with the merits of Guyana's claims within specific parameters. The court also set a deadline for Venezuela to submit its counter-memorial by April 8, 2024. Recognizing the increased aggression by Venezuela, Guyana received resounding international support on this matter, including from the United States of America. We are well aware, Mr. Speaker, that in this current time, much of Venezuela's contention stems from Guyana's growing oil and gas industry, following the world-class oil discovery in Guyana's territorial waters. Venezuela's claim includes the waters off the Essequibo coast, where much of those oil discoveries exist. In its most recent development, Venezuela's unlawful persistence is seen in the unanimous approval by Venezuela's National Assembly for a national referendum slated for December the 3rd, with a list of 5 questions that it intends to put before the people of Venezuela to support its claim over our territory. Continuing along the lawful and respectful path, Guyana, in October, filed a request with the ICJ for an intervention against this action, as it seeks to support Venezuela's intention to continue to bypass international law. Guyana is thankful for the ICJ intervention through a public hearing slated for November the 14th. Mr. Speaker, we want to emphasize that Venezuela's refusal to accept the 1899 award and its ongoing hostile actions and insistence on acting in opposition to the award's provisions erode the fundamental principles of international law. Upholding these principles, Mr. Speaker, is crucial for preserving global peace, security, and stability. The stubborn and malicious persistence of Venezuela towards Guyana's territory has seen the international community, represented by numerous nations around the world, voicing their unequivocal support for our cause. In a statement made in September, the Caribbean community voiced deep concerns regarding Venezuela's threat to use force against Guyana's licensed operations in its water, describing it as a violation of international law and at odds with the Latin American and Caribbean region's commitment to maintaining our region as a zone of peace. CARICOM also expressed its concerns over Venezuela's plan for a referendum on its territorial claim and expressed optimism that Venezuela would engage fully in the ICJ's process. CARICOM reiterated its steadfast support for Guyana's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and legitimate right to develop its resources peacefully. Mr. Speaker, the Commonwealth expressed its solidarity with Guyana and CARICOM, affirming concerns about the upcoming referendum. The Commonwealth also strongly emphasized its support for the rule of law and Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity in its statement. The 5 referendum questions, particularly question 5, which suggests the creation of a Venezuelan state in Guyana's Essequibo region, are viewed as violations of international law, leading to heightened tensions and jeopardizing regional peace. The Commonwealth also reiterated its endorsement of the ICJ's legal process and encouraged Venezuela's participation, as the referendum goes against the principles of peaceful conflict resolution. Mr. Speaker, in a recent address at an extraordinary special session of the Permanent Council within the Organization of American States, I took the opportunity presented to me to once again emphasize the direct threat that Venezuela's claim poses to Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity. During that event, Guyana received strong backing, including a clear reaffirmation from the OAS Secretary General, Mr. Luis Almagro, in favor of a peaceful resolution to the dispute in alignment with international law, a commitment that Guyana has consistently upheld. Additionally, member states of CARICOM, United Nations, and our neighboring country, Brazil, reiterated their support and called for a peaceful resolution of this issue. Mr. Speaker, Support was also provided by the European Union's ambassador to Guyana, who also expressed confidence in the ICJ's authority in settling this matter and urged parties to avoid unilateral actions that could escalate the situation. Mr. Speaker, we deeply appreciate the solidarity and understanding demonstrated by these and other international bodies. Their unwavering confidence in pursuing a lawful and peaceful path, along which the recognition of the ICJ's jurisdiction is a clear endorsement of the shared values of justice, fairness, and the rule of law that unite us all. As a government and a nation, we remain steadfast in upholding the sanctity of sovereign borders and the principles governing international relations. Mr. Speaker, we call upon the international community to continue their support for our just cause. We urge all nations to recognize that this issue transcends a bilateral dispute. It's about upholding the international legal order and the principles that bind us. It's about ensuring that justice triumphs over aggression and intimidation. The ICJ, as an impartial and reputable institution, is well equipped to objectively assess the situation and ensure a fair resolution. We maintain our trust in the rule of law and have confidence that the ICJ will uphold the principles of justice and respect for sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, our government's stance on this issue is unequivocal. As articulated in an official statement from our administration, Venezuela's actions represent a blatant violation of the fundamental principles outlined in the UN Charter, the OAS Charter, and general international law. The seizure of Guyana's territory, if allowed, would amount to the grave international crime of aggression. It is essential to understand that neither a government nor its people, under international law, possess the authority to seize, annex, or encroach upon the territory of another nation. International law strongly prohibits such actions. Guyana formally rejects Venezuela's persistent attempts to undermine the sovereignty and integrity of our nation. Further, Mr. Speaker, I wish to unwaveringly support His Excellency President Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali's consistent stance on this matter over the past weeks. While we view Venezuela's decision to hold a referendum as a violation of international legal norms, we remain steadfast in our commitment to a peaceful approach to resolving this issue. We maintain our trust in the ICJ, believing that its judgment will align with international law. Most importantly, as a nation and a people, we stand resolute in defending our country's sovereignty and territorial integrity while respecting boundaries and our neighboring nations. We firmly reject any attempts to disrupt peace, and as His Excellency emphasized, we will continue to advocate for the cause of international law to achieve a peaceful resolution. Mr. Speaker, I want to underscore another significant aspect of the collateral damage caused by this issue, its impact on the people. This controversy has given rise to conflicting ideologies among generations in both countries. In Guyana, our education teaches us that the entire 214,970 square kilometers are marked on our map belongs to us. Quite rightly so, and quite rightly so. While in Venezuela, their narrative insists that they rightfully claim nearly 160 square kilometers, comprising more than 2/3 of Guyana's territory. Mr. Speaker, we are witnessing decades of division among our people, resulting in social fragmentation stemming from contradictory narratives. This in turn has adverse effects on economic development and investments between our neighboring nations. It is a conflict that incites geopolitical tension that can affect regional stability and international relations. Mr. Speaker, the endurance of this controversy has been excessive, and Venezuela's unrelenting pursuit of unfounded territorial claims not only insults our nation, but also undermines the cherished principles of justice and sovereignty held by the international community. Guyana vehemently denounces Venezuela's actions with the utmost strength and urges the global community to stand by us as we pursue a peaceful and equitable resolution through the International Court of Justice. Mr. Speaker, there must be no, and I quote, Bolivarian peace diplomacy, end of quote, in our diplomatic language with Venezuela. There must be no resume legal behavior between us and Venezuela. President Ali would not have to sit down to negotiate with Venezuela, according to Delcy Rodriguez, whether we want it or not. That will not happen. Mr. Speaker, the matter is before the International Court of Justice. Time for negotiation is over. That's right. Mr. Speaker, there be no need for any dialogue with Nicolas Maduro, Compañero Maduro. There will be no meeting, not now, between Compañero Maduro and President Irfan Ali. Mr. Speaker, Essequibo is no board island. No concessions, true bilateral. No to invasion, no to annexation, and other acts of aggression. Let the ICJ rule. Let the ICJ be the judge and deliver a final judgment on this controversy that has outlived its usefulness to both the peoples of Venezuela and Guyana. Mr. Speaker, Guyana remains a democracy. And if Venezuela is a democracy too, then Compañero Nicolas Maduro must face his electorate and defend his government's successes in righting the socio-economic conditions that led to over 7 million Venezuelans seeking betterment by running out of Venezuela to every other South American country. Compañero Maduro must not be allowed by the international and regional communities to use Guyana's Essequibo as a rallying point or as a clarion call for his re-election in 2024. Essequibo belongs to Guyana and Guyanese only. Together, we will secure the triumph of justice and preserve our nation's sovereignty. This is a whole of government approach. In fact, a whole of country approach, as we once and for all defend our territorial integrity and national sovereignty. Thank you, and may the cause of justice and peace prevail. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable members, I think every one of us would want to hear all of the presentations in its entirety, so let's take a short 10-minute break and come back with the Leader of the Opposition.
We are a peaceful people, struggle is we struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. We ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one caress, not a blade of grass. This land is all I know. We gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow and never break. Our fathers came here and they lived and died here, and we ain't moving nowhere, make no mistake. Cause we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one rice, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupaluni and the Essequibo, bedtime or night. Though we may criticize it, this is our own, we love it, and we need to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one caress, not a blade of grass. So we ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one caress, not a blade of grass.